Richard Allen, the man accused of being the Delphi murderer, will be seeing his day in court shortly. A hearing recently held to discuss several motions in the case. And as of right now, they're all up in the air. The judge is saying, I will take all of this under advisement. So we'll see what those are going to be. But one of the biggest things is the defense wanting to get all 60 confessions of Richard Allen removed from the actual trial. So the jury doesn't hear that. Now, keep in mind, these 60 confessions were in a time where he was in solitary confinement, where he may say, I killed them, and then in the same sentence, literally eat a piece of his own poop. That's what was happening in that case. So, how legit are these confessions? How strong can they be in court, especially with that number of them? Shavaun Scott, psychotherapist and author, joining us to discuss. Let's just get onto that right away. A
Mhm.
lot of confessions in a 22-month period in solitary confinement. Do they have any weight?
It's what a mess this case is, really. Um, Psychotic people have made false confessions, and when you're psychotic, you have lost contact with reality. You don't know what reality is, and you can be coerced and intimidated. Certainly psychotic people don't know what happened,
Mhm.
so they may just have these fanciful stories coming into their mind. They may be hearing voices that are telling them they did things that they didn't do. Some of these stories that the voices tell them are completely bizarre and strange. um, but this is such a confusing case. There were so many bizarre things about the staging of the murder scene. It did strike me as this is likely a psychotic perpetrator. This is just weird. All the various things about it. So is it possible that Richard Allen did this? Sure. Is it possible he didn't? Sure. And we're just going to have to look at all the evidence and what else the state may have that we don't know about at this point.
I mean, what does solitary confinement to this level do to someone? I mean, especially someone who has no criminal record, has no history of violent crimes or really anything for that matter, working at the CVS, and suddenly, he raises his hand and says, hey, I was over there. How can I help? And now he's suspect number one and he's accused of the crime. And now, guess what? 22 months in a box. You get 1 hour out a day. That's gotta, severely mess with someone. I think mess is not even an applicable term for something like that.
It's a really fascinating question, and solitary confinement is definitely a stressor on people. But if you don't have pre-existing tendencies towards psychosis or some kind of mental instability, you're not going to deteriorate to the point where you're eating feces or smearing feces or any of these kinds of bizarre things. I think if you or I were in solitary confinement, we would definitely get depressed. We would get anxious. We might be having panic attacks. That would be in the normal range.
Mhm.
But this kind of gross psychosis indicates to me this is a person who had some pre-existing vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
Was there a tendency towards psychotic thinking that perhaps had just never really manifested? Or maybe it had, and we just don't know about it,
Mhm.
So I have many, many questions about this case. It's really been an interesting one, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. We just don't have the whole story yet.
We haven't really heard anything from anyone coming out and saying, "Oh God, Richard Allen, yeah, he was nuts." All we've heard is like he was a normal guy, and obviously, what goes on behind closed doors goes on behind closed doors. But wouldn't there be kind of a character arc here or something that would show that this man was not healthy, if in fact he was capable of doing these sort of things. We're not seeing that we've seen in other, like Koberger. We have people coming out going, yeah, really a lot of issues with women, all of that. Nothing on Richard Allen other than he was a nice guy.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. If I were looking at being an investigator who was trying to gather information, I would do in-depth interviews with the people closest to him. And I don't know that we've seen in-depth
Hmm.
interviews with the people closest to him. It's certainly not been televised.
Hmm.
So we just don't really know. There are people who have psychotic tendencies who maybe had a break when they were 18 or 20, and then they got on some meds and they lived, another decade or two and had no symptoms. But yet, a person like that, I know some people like that, that had a young break and
Hmm.
then got stabilized. And then at 40 or 50, had another break and had a severe break. And so we just don't know.
Hmm.
I can't say I lean one way or the other on this
Sure.
case, because to me, looking at it clinically, there's just a lot of weird stuff, and we don't have the whole story. And then you throw in the Odinist cult bizarre. This is really one that's just got strange thing after another.
It definitely is a strange case, the case of Richard Allen, especially when you start going down the Odinist road and all of those arguments where you actually do have guards that were practicing Odinism. I mean, there's things on their Facebook pages. There's things publicly known. They have patches, or they did have patches. They have tattoos, uh, and that's what was left at the crime scene. Though that in what they believe to be what looks like an Odinist ritual. Richard Allen doesn't have any of that. There's no history of him being an Odinist. He didn't have patches. He didn't have tattoos. He didn't, as far as we know, as of right now, and this is why we have trials, so we can pull all this out.
Yeah.
There's no weird search history or anything of that nature. I think we would have heard some of these things by now. We haven't seen the probable cause affidavit, but again, there is nothing that connects him to that scene when we're looking at the Odinist connection. There's other people that certainly seem to be connected, but not him, which is just bizarre.
Yeah, all of it is bizarre. The crimes were bizarre. His deterioration is unusual, to the extent he's
Hmm.
deteriorated in that way. Having guards working in a prison system who can wear patches like that on their uniforms, that's bizarre. It's just layer and layer of weird with this case.
What would spark someone to make a false confession in a case like this?
Well, we have a documented history of several hundred people who made false confessions and then were found years later to be completely innocent. Usually that happens during aggressive or coercive, can I say that? Coercive
Coercive,
police
yeah, yeah.
interrogation. Yeah. Where they're pressured or they're promised, if you just confess, this will all go away. Usually it's under those circumstances. When it's not under that circumstance, usually, as I mentioned, it's a person who's psychotic and they've had a break with reality. And so they're living this fantasy or hearing voices that are telling them they did it or something like that, which
Mhm.
is always possible here.
But when you're in a box for all that time, and from what we've heard, take it for what it is, of stories of him being taunted by the guards and just harassed endlessly. I mean, it's torture basically, which I just find shocking that it's just like, yep, that's what happens there.
Mhm, mhm.
Nothing's done about it. That I mean, I could see where that would take place, but we're talking not just like one confession. We're talking 60
Yeah,
confessions to different people.
yeah.
How often is that the case? Where I mean, I don't know where that falls in terms of likelihood of being legitimate or not. When you go to that number of confessions to different individuals at different points in time.
Well, it's certainly relevant, and it's something I would take a close look at. But at the same time, is this person grossly psychotic when they're making these kind of confessions? And that to me is what puts a big question mark on it.
Because now he's saying, I was nuts. I was psychotic at that time when I was saying those things. I was under
Yeah.
such stress. I do not admit to doing these sort of things. Um, I don't know. It's a weird case where we look at this, and I do wonder sometimes because of the circumstances and the way he was treated. Are we looking at him as innocent when maybe he's not? Where or more likely innocent than he's not, simply because of the extenuating circumstances. I mean, I think same thing with the Karen Reed case in a lot of ways, where because of bad behavior after the fact by the authorities, um, it really makes you feel bad for the individual, whether they did it or not. Like, you can't treat somebody the way that
Mhm.
Richard Allen has been treated.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. That prison needs to be cleaned up. There's just so much that we've heard about, and who knows what we haven't heard about that
Mhm.
is just wrong and not ethical behavior.
It's going to be very fascinating. Let me ask you more question about the 60 plus confessions. Does it matter who they confess to in terms of legitimacy? Does it ever seem to have a bit more weight if it's to a family member, or if it's to a guard, or if it's a police interrogation or something of that nature?
That's a really good question. And, would a person be more apt, perhaps, to confess to a family member? They feel a greater bond with them, they feel a sense of closeness. I don't know I can say definitively that they would be more apt to do that, but that's certainly possible.
You know, and that I guess he's confessed to almost everybody that would listen. It seems around him, so
Mhm.
it'll be fascinating. Hey, thanks for checking out the video. Be sure to follow us wherever you download podcasts, and especially Apple Podcasts, where you can get advanced episode and premium content on our premium channel right there. Also, be sure to follow us on social media so you don't miss any breaking updates on the stories that matter to you most. We're on TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Brueski, and you'll find us right there. Again, thanks for watching.